Guests on your show every single week. We're giving you all the details you need to know right here, right now on Air Brands.
You are now tuned in to the On Air Brands podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another great episode of the On Air Brand Show with your host. I am Todd Giannattasio. I have Eric Cabral and Josh Carey with me.
How do you know? How do you know it's a great episode? It just started.
Time track.
Because I read the show notes. I know what's in store today. I know how difficult it is for some people to get great guests on their podcasts and on their shows, and I know we have all the answers for them. So this episode is going to be epic. And not only is this episode going to be epic, but this is actually part 1 of 2, because today we're giving everybody all they need to know about how to get great guests on their show. And next week in part 2, we're going to be showing everyone how they can become a guest on other shows very easily and efficiently, and how that can help them grow their own show and their business. So this is part 1 of 2 great episodes. I'm jumping ahead. I'm saying even next week's episode is going to be great. So
speaking of part 2, all I'm saying is Coming to America, the sequel.
Oh,
they also thought this is going to be a great movie, guys, or they wouldn't have made it. I'm just saying.
I think Eddie Murphy and Adam Sandler have figured out a wonderful way to get a studio to pay for a reunion for all their friends and family.
Josh, you're right. Eric, that's a good point. Josh, I'm not sure they knew if it was going to be good or not. I think it was, let me get all my boys together and let's have some fun making this thing. Now, which is what we're doing here, but we're also going to make the episode awesome for our viewers and listeners. So
I believe it.
Yeah. So everybody get the show notes and make sure you're subscribed at onairbrands.com/show, because that is where you're going to get all the details on the great stuff we're breaking down today to help you get awesome guests on your podcast. So let's kick it off, guys. Like, what are some ways starting a new show, or you haven't had guests on before and you're ready, you're like, I want to start bringing guests on the show. What are some different ways that a show host can attract some guests? Want me to rattle off a list and we can go through them individually?
Well, let me add, my personal experience, and this may help others out there. But there's many different ways, and Todd, I'm sure you're going to outline. But for me, in the beginning, it was always about relationships and using this as a tool to establish relationships or leveraging the relationships I already had. Mm-hmm. That was how the podcast guest sourcing worked for me. But yeah, there's many different ways to slice it. What's on your list?
So I'm number 1 on the list here. Ding, 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 Mr. Cabral. Great work. It is using your existing network and either directly or referrals from your existing network. Number 2 on the list here I have is cold outreach, and there's a couple different ways that you could do that. I have an excellent proven strategy that I've used for a couple different shows that I've launched over the years. I'll break those down later on in the episode. Then, of course, there's events like PodMax, which next one, if you're listening, watching live, podmax.co, you can sign up for April 16th. And that's where we pair up podcast hosts and guests, three episodes in a day. So events like that make it super easy and efficient for hosts and guests to team up, right? So things like that. You can go with the infamous booking agencies, which have their pros and cons that I'm sure we'll go through. I know Josh has some pet peeves around that kind of stuff that we just talked about earlier on the PodMax show. So for you guys listening to us now, make sure you're subscribed to the PodMax podcast as well, where every week these two gentlemen break down news, trends, and insights from the podcasting industry.
You could subscribe, but it's $0 if you subscribe. $0.
Yep, and that's a little callback for everybody. Apple is changing the word subscribe to follow now, and the reason that they've put out is because they think the word subscribe has too much of a implication that there's a payment behind it, And of course, subscribing to podcasts is typically a
Now,
free endeavor.
When Better Homes and Garden was a thing, you know, when I would get, you know, Yacht Monthly, you know.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you too?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, it was a paid subscription, but who subscribes to magazines anymore? No one
I
pays
subscribe
for
to email newsletters. I subscribe to emails. These are free that I'm getting. Yeah, I
Apple,
agree, I
wake
agree.
up.
Yeah. All right, back on the rails. Number 6 and the final way to get guests on your show is to get referrals from guests. So once you start getting guests on your show, asking them for referrals to other people they think might be interesting. I know a lot of good shows that I've been a guest on. Once we turn the camera off, that's part of the conversation where they say, you know, now that you've been on the show, you see what it's all about. Who comes to mind that might be a good guest for me to also have on the show? So referrals to other guests from guests that you've had on the show. So number 1, your network and referrals, I think is a pretty straightforward task, right? Post on your social media, send out some emails. If anyone specific comes to mind that you want to have on, you reach out to them. And I think this is a good way for everybody to get started if they want to have guests, is think about who are some high caliber, high quality conversations that you can have so that the next tier of guests, those cold outreach people, can see the show and see the format, see you get into the swing of things. And also when it's your network, you're going to have a good rapport going, batting around the topic. So it's going to have a much better feel than if you're still getting the swing of having guests and having those conversations. So when you do it with someone you have rapport with already that's in your network, it's going to make for a better show. And when those future potential guests take a look at your show, they're like, oh yeah, this host is a pro, very conversational, flows naturally. That, you know, this is somebody I can get on board with. And I think, and I'm going to set up a callback, is part of what makes for a great guest is that they are not too stiff or rigid, right? They are very conversational. They're able to hop into the flow and bat around ideas. And there's a good back and forth, kind of volley of conversation, I think, is what makes for a good guest, who obviously can also bring value with their expertise or experience by telling good stories, all that kind of stuff that makes for a great podcast episode in general, which you guys can check out back on season 2, episode 5 of the On Air Brand Show, or just go back to onairbrands.com/show to check that out for all the criteria to make a great podcast episode. But that conversational part, I think, is key. And when we talk about cold outreach as the next tactic here for getting guests on your show, this is what I've done in the past and has worked very successfully to level up the type of people I'm bringing on, is the type of people that are going to make good guests are going to be experts, and they're going to be someone you can have a good conversation with. And how do you know a complete stranger is going to be someone you can have a good conversation with, right? It's basically impossible unless you've heard them have these conversations before on other podcasts. And so my little hack and this is relationship building as well as podcast guest attraction, because they are one and the same, is just in the natural flow of your podcast listening. When you're listening to an episode, screenshot it if you like the topic of conversation, and if you like that guest who's on the show, share it on Instagram, share it on social, and tag the guest. And especially with Instagram stories, that makes it super easy for them to at least double tap and give you a heart in the DMs, which has happened 100% of the time I've done this. If not actually replying to you and saying, oh, thanks so much for listening, because most guests on shows are not on the celebrity platform tier of the host itself, right? And so they are appreciative of people like actually listening and valuing what they're saying. So from that, you could say, great episode. I loved when you talked about X, Y, and Z. And now, because you listen to the podcast as you would have normally, you're not doing any additional research. This isn't taking out any extra time out of your day because you already listened to the episode yourself. And so now you can build up true value and rapport with this person by saying, I love those tips that you talked about XYZ. We do some of those in our business, or whatever it is. Have a genuine back and forth conversation, giving them some compliments. That's going to start the conversation off. And then that's when you can mention, I also have a show. It's obviously not as big as the X show that you were on, but I would love to have this conversation with you on the show. I think it'd be great for the audience, get your name out more, etc. Almost 100% of the time at that point, you're going to get a yes. And now where you take it to the next level is you do this, you kind of are siphoning guests off of other popular shows You have them on your show. These episodes get published. They're on your website. They're in your feed. You have the guest's face on your thumbnails on the website. Then you can start hitting up the host. So then you screenshot the episode, you tag the hosts, they do the same thing, double tap, you start a little conversation, and they check out your social feed and they go, "Oh wow, the last few pictures here, I know those guests." And they go, "Yeah, I see we have some of the same mutual friends." And then you could say, "Yeah, I'd love to have you on the show too." Now you've built up rapport with these other people because they see you're in the same circles as them because you've been building relationships with their guests. And I could tell you real life, and I'm happy to expose the names here because I know they would also appreciate giving the value and tips. But this is exactly how I started my relationship with Matt and Joe from the Hustle and Flowchart podcast. It's exactly how I started my relationship with Shayna from Repurpose House. And it was that Shayna was a guest on their show. So when she was on, I screenshotted the episode, tagged her. She replied. We started chatting. We had a conversation. I said, "Hey, I have a show. I'd love to have you on." She loved coming on. I did that with multiple people. And then I started, commenting on some of Joe's posts on Facebook. We got into a DM conversation. I said, "Hey, I have a show." And he took a look at the website and said, "Oh, wow, looks like we've had a lot of the same guests. I'd love to come on." Yeah. And then Joe came on my show, and now we have a nice, what I would call friendship. I don't know if he'd go that far, but I'll call it friendship. And obviously we have the relationship through Podmax with them too now, and they're actually going to be the workshop during our working lunch on April 16th. And they have a lot of great stuff coming out of the Hustle and Flowchart community that they're going to be talking about. So this is step-by-step how to get great guests that are going to be a great conversation because you're naturally doing the research and immersing yourself in their conversations. And you've heard them having conversations. So it's like, you listen to a show, you're like hanging out in the room with these people. You could jump in and have your conversation with them too. So now you're attracting high quality guests that you're almost guaranteed successful conversations with because you've already heard them and vetted them. You've built some rapport back and forth. You get them on your show. Then you can level up and then start getting the hosts of those different shows as you build relationships with them along the way.
So when you're doing this, isn't there something to be said? So if I see Todd on a show and I'm like, "Oh, I would love Todd to be on my show." So I'm going to screenshot, I'm going to go to Instagram stories, going to tag him, he'll see it, we'll start a conversation. But then aren't you, Todd, once I say, "Hey, great episode, I'd love for you to be on my show," aren't you going to do an ounce of due diligence by now poking around my socials for 10 or 15 seconds to just get an impression of if you want to associate and actually be on my show? It's not simply the request, right? So what's the bare minimum of what you need to see or not in my social for your due diligence? Yeah.
So I think, that actually goes in right to the next topic that I want to cover here on attracting guests is what's in it for them, right? So if you want to attract guests, like you said, they're going to do a little due diligence here before saying yes right away. And so I think a couple of things that you want. One, if you have a large audience already, that's going to play a part, but that's not usually the main reason, right? So it's really more about the topics and value that you provide and the type of people you're communicating with, right? Like, are we going to vibe together? And I think part of that, if this is once you start rolling and they see, oh, these are the reason this strategy works that I just explained is because I'll post on social media the screenshot of me and the guest together, right? And so every time there's a new episode, you post on social. So when they check out your social feed, they see, oh, I know a couple of these people, right? And I think, but by posting value, having a valuable social media presence will show them what it is that you're all about, right? And so showing your values, your mission, the type of topics that you cover, your school of thought on things, right? Because not that you wouldn't want to be on a show where it's contrary, because that could build for a good, but just the way you deliver your message and the way that you talk about things. Are you a good person and interested in adding value to the world? Or is it, if they check out your show, is it like, oh, they start off with 5 minutes worth of commercials for their own products. They do a 10-minute interview. They do another 3-minute commercial for their own products. Every other post is they're trying to sell something, right? Like this is just the natural things we talk about in building a modern business these days. It's just when you come from a place of delivering value and service to an audience, which I think our listeners and viewers know by now, right? Is that's the key to building a successful business these days. Yeah. When you come at it from that place, I think it's super important. But for the people who don't have, one, if you're thinking you need a large audience, to get good guests. That's not true at all, because I've had a small audience. One, everyone starts with a small audience. And two, I've had small audiences where I've had the guests come on, and even with dozens of listeners, I know for a fact that some of the guests that have come on, and then of course at the end you let them plug whatever freebie thing they want, or if they have a show, if they're plugging a book or a product of some kind, you always let them do that kind of thing. And with only dozens of listeners, I know that my listeners have bought stuff from my guests before, because that 45 minutes was so valuable and intriguing. So, there is always that part of it. But, really what's in it for them is, can they deliver value towards your mission? So we have another client / friend. His name's Scott Agnoli. He's got a great new show called Get a Good Start. And he's only like 11 episodes in. And he's had some really, really great guests on the show. And I know of the guests that he has booked coming up. And some of them are big names, but they're all a big deal. A lot of executives. And the reason that these people are interested in being on his show is the mission behind his show. And his show is all about helping late teens, early 20s, in college, starting your career. How do you get a good start in your career? And then the show itself goes into how do you get a good start every day and on new projects and different things like that. But the mission of, let's give some value to the young, the young professionals out there, is something that all of these very successful and seasoned entrepreneurs and executives, they all want to give back and give that value. And so when you have a mission that people can piggyback onto and help serve with you, that's going to help attract them too,
It's all good stuff, man. You remind me of, we are working with the PLC, an organization called the Princeton Learning Center, and they're all about educating and inspiring the next generation on different schools of thought, non-traditional sort of learning. They go through their day and flow the way they want to. They pick, sort of like college, where you pick your own classes that you're interested in, and they have speakers. I've spoken at some of their events where they're hearing people who are outside of the box, who aren't necessarily from the traditional sort of corporate type of mindset, and we align with them because of that mission. Because of the mission that they're building the next, generation of entrepreneurs and business owners. Yeah. And, we want to inspire and help them lead the charge by helping them in any way we can. And it's a mutual benefit, because they come in by introducing us to their their community. And then eventually sometimes we get people that work for our companies, they intern at our companies. So it's always a win-win when you can get behind someone's mission.
Aligning mission. And then, the last thing I have on the list here, although I'm sure there's plenty of other reasons we could think of, is giving them the content asset, right? Like, we know people who are in business and they will go on any show because they want more content to put out for themselves and to get their tentacles out to the world and just put valuable messaging out in every direction that they can. And so they want to be on shows so that they're creating these content assets where they're showing up, educating, empowering, inspiring, motivating, entertaining, all those different types of things. And they understand that in today's world, every business, like we say on the show every week, every business is a whatever you are plus a media company. And so when people have that understanding, they know they need to be creating content regularly, and being a guest on shows is an excellent way to do that. So when you find people that are bought into that methodology, that's another great reason for people who want to be a guest on shows, is by giving them those content assets.
Yeah. The ones that get it right, Todd, remember, I think it was yesterday, we were just cruising around online and sharing screen, and you showed me that company. It was Drift.
Yeah,
right?
Drift. Yep.
They literally, they're a tech company. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, if you looked on their main page, every single thought leader, every single manager or, head of a department had a show.
Yeah. So they have their own, their company. Drift is a great example of like the media company aspect of things, where, their software company, they do the little chat messenger bot type things. And they have, I think, 5 or 6 shows different shows, and each one of them is with their CMO talking about CMO stuff. Their CEO has, experience and leadership show. Their head of ops, they have an ops show. There was I think a customer success one. There was so they're create, that's also what I always talk about is personifying and humanizing your company. And how do you do that when you get to be larger than a few people is put the heads of these departments, they're the experts in these fields. Let's have them have their own show and put their face and names in front of these things. And being in people's earbuds every week is a great way to build relationship between a company and an audience. And then, just cranking out that media is super important.
Yeah. Just creating content for them, at ridiculous levels by having 5-6 shows. And then also, servicing their clients and their partners by saying, hey, you want to be on this show? You want to be on that show? There's something for you get a show, you get a show, you get a show. Check under your chair. You may have a show.
And so back to different ways that we can get guests for our show. So I gave my one way of cold outreach by doing the little, podcast listening and DMing. But then, of course, there's, you can Google search and find contact forms and do the whole manual outreach process, which, if you have more time than money and you're getting started, you got to hustle. Sometimes you got to do things that don't scale. That might be a way that you have to do it, is researching, knowing who do you think would be a great guest for your show based on their expertise and their experience, and that they'd be a good conversationalist for your audience. And then just finding their contact information and cold pitching. And so, some people do have booking agencies that cold pitch people. And I know there's a lot of cons to that because it becomes very boilerplate. You don't stand out because they're doing this for so many different people. They're just plugging into these templated messages. And so the booking agency / cold outreach stuff, what are some mistakes you guys see people making when they're doing that cold outreach to get guests?
It's a numbers game for them, and we're on the receiving end, and there is zero connection. I think we've had enough pieces of dialogue in shows together and in various formats to say business is about relationships. Yes. It's about connection and communicating, and we stand for that quite clearly. And this method just lacks all of that. I'm on the receiving end. I've been on the receiving end for a few years now, where a variety of booking agents will, and I hear this consistently from so many of our colleagues, that today it's becoming a little overwhelming because it just seems like it's a spray and pray model. They're just trying to fulfill a set number of guest spots for their client. And if they can just, get in touch with as many hosts as possible, it's a numbers game to them. And unfortunately, it's at our expense. I couldn't tell you a name of a person who has ever sent me a request to have their client on my show. Now think about that in any other situation. Somebody's trying to get me to buy something. There's no dollar exchange on my side, but there's time exchange, there's energy exchange, there's reputation exchange, right? You're asking me for a very personal thing. Call it a favor, calling it a business transaction of sorts. I'll do something for you, you'll do, right? Yet, I could not tell you to this day who is signing those emails, whether I'm saying yes or no. In the past, sure, I've had my fair share of saying yes to these. We spoke about in our previous episode on the Podmax podcast about my feeling on that. But today, it's many more no's than yeses. But I can't tell you who. I have no relationship with any of these people.
Yeah, and life and business is all about relationships. And one of my key mottos for all of our clients is don't sell to strangers, right? I mean, we've been raised since we were kids. Don't take candy from strangers. Don't talk to strangers. But then when we get into adulthood and business, how many strangers are trying to push stuff on us, right? So, break that habit and create conversations, open relationships first, and show some value when you start pitching stuff like that. I totally agree. And think about the opposite of the booking agency versus what I described that I do. Now, granted, they're reaching hundreds or thousands of people a day, and I'm doing it I'm more surgical and strategic with my approach, but mine could not be more personal. Hey, Josh, I just literally listened to you talk for an hour sitting alone by myself or, doing the dishes or whatever I was doing. And I loved all the stuff. Let me tell you exactly what it was, because, and you're receiving that and you're like, oh, obviously this guy just listened to the show because he's telling me all these things. And then, and of course, I share my insights. So think about the difference in those two things where I'm giving such a custom personalized, and the proof of me listening by the screenshot itself, right? It started off by me showing you I'm listening to the show and going from there versus, all right, what CRM automation tool can we load up? Like let's run a Google search scraper to find every website that says podcast host and anything we can find with an email address in it, and scrape that out. And let's load that up into an automated tool. And let's fill in the blanks of our client's information into this template and blast out 1,000 emails today and see if anybody responds. 3 people respond. Great. Hey, we just got you on the 3 shows we guaranteed. It's like, yeah, but you just burned 997 other relationships.
Right. Yeah. I want to add something to what Josh was saying as well, where, this and any other business is a relationship built business. And if you are trying to matchmake and find a great guest for me, or find me as a guest, a great host that I can tell my story on, well, why is it that you in the middle don't know who I am or who they are?
Right.
Why is it that there is zero relationship between you and the host and you and the guest? Therefore,
hilarious.
to me, I need to do my due diligence and work. You didn't do any work other than spray and pray. All you did was send an email that was a boilerplate email and send me a bio that looks like 1,000 bios that I get a day. You have zero context. You have zero idea if that person is even going to be good on my show, nor have you ever even put a minute in to listen to my show or listen to that guest as a guest on a show to tell me why they'd be great for my show. There's nothing there. So I just wanted to highlight why PodMax works is because we are the opposite of that. We literally know every single show host. We know their business. We know their family's names. We know what they're going through in life. We know their struggles.
We know their boats' names.
We know their boats' names. We know that they have studios on
Studio
boats.
C.
Yeah.
We know our hosts. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we know our guests. We know who they are. We know all their pain points and struggles and story. And then we say, oh, you know what? Sally would be great on Larry's show because of this. They have that connection. Tell me who else is doing that in the industry. And that's why this type of method works for people.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's amazing during the day at the event when we come back from the episode recordings, how many guests will say, oh my, I can't believe that's who I got matched. They think it's somewhat coincidental. They don't realize all the hard work that goes in the back. And they're like, wow, that was an amazing conversation. I can't believe how well we hit it off. This feels 100% so magical.
of the time.
100% of the time. And it's all because of all that due diligence that's done on the PodMax side of things to pair those people up and knowing so intimately everybody involved.
Let me tell you another mistake that
Tell me.
Well, thank you, Todd. Bypassing for a minute the booking agency. So I had a guest on some time ago, like we all have, and this person was an author, right? Happened to write a book, but we know that's never what the conversation should be about. So fine, and it never was or is that episode. A year plus later, I get an email from this person saying, "Hey, I just wrote my 2nd book. Could you have me back on?" When do you think I recorded that episode? I did not, because I'm not interested in your 2nd book. Am I?
Yeah.
Just not, right? No host is interested in any of your books, right? Think about where we're going with this. It's not about that. It can become about that, but that's not the conversation we want to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And, like Joe Fear from the Hustle and Flowchart show came on my show. We didn't talk once about their products, and they have evolved their products since that episode. But we didn't talk once about the products. But at the end, I said, all right, where can our listeners find you? And he said, oh, we have a free thing. You can go sign up over at, whatever. And then, and like I said, I know for a fact multiple people who went over, signed up for the free thing, and then of course they have a great machine on the back end, and then ended up buying their program because of it, which was a win-win for everybody. I'm not ashamed of those kind of sales because I know that their products are great, and I know that the listeners got a lot out of it. But he didn't come on talking about his product he didn't talk about it once, right? We just talked, added value for 45 minutes, and then said, hey, you could take the next step and have this free thing over here if you're interested in learning more. And so, if you want to learn more about like podcast strategies for your business and stuff, we went into that in earlier episodes this season. So if you wanted to check out episode 1, we really break that down, of season 2, and episode 3 as well, onairbrands.com/show. But yeah, it's about having someone come on who's going to add value, not coming on because they have something to promote. But let me ask you this. Let's throw this around. If you did want to get a bigger name, now maybe not a Seth Godin is going to say yes just because he has a book coming out, because he can get on anything anytime he wants, right? But there is a better opportunity to land a big name guest if they do have something coming out and promoting. So what do you think about that side of things?
Well, that's only true because they happen to be in that mode. They are in PR mode, so they're only more perceptive. It's like when you just break up with somebody, give yourself 3 to 6 months and then start going out on the dating scene, right? You're not ready beforehand. There's a right and a wrong time for. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
I want to add to this, Todd. So when you want to have a superstar guest, someone, a dream 100 of yours, let's say. Yep. And, I recommend you create that list, right? Whether it's your dream 20 or your dream 100, make a list of people that you would absolutely have. And sky's the limit, right? Tony Robbins, Oprah Winfrey, whoever you want. So because you never know who you're talking to.
Yep.
So for example, we had Hal Elrod as a guest at Podmax. He spoke and completely floored the audience. Everybody loved him. We're going to have him back at some point. So Larry Roberts, who's one of our, star brand ambassadors of Podmax, was just amazed and told everyone he loves to take selfies with the celebrity guests at Podmax, and he takes a selfie. Hal Elrod's face is on his computer. Yeah, and he posted. Well, someone reached out and said, "Oh my God, he's been on my Dream 100 forever. I love The Miracle Morning. I love Hal Elrod. How did that happen?" This so happened to be a person in Larry's world that never took Larry seriously. She was like, "You're a podcaster." Sure. Yeah. But meanwhile, she's a podcaster. She's been doing it for years. Now she's like,
so she wasn't casting judgment on podcasters in general, just Larry specifically.
Just Larry specifically, because she knew him before he was a podcaster, right? She knows him as Larry, not Larry the podcaster. Right. So she was like, respect. How did that happen? He goes, well, I know these guys are tremendous at podcasts and Podmax and blah, blah, blah. I told her the whole story. You want an intro. He made an intro to this young woman. And we said, yeah, you're great. We love you. She's like, all I ask is, he's been on my list. I've always wanted to talk to Hal on my show. Is it a possibility? I'm like, it doesn't hurt for me to ask. Let me go ask him. Asked him. He said yes, because like you guys said, he was on a tour. He was on a podcast circuit tour. And boom, it happened. She never really ever thought about it. But if you keep...
Oh, boy.
And now that's where Larry came in and said, who's laughing now, right? He's the star, right?
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because people do ask me when they interview, who would be your ideal? And I'm like, Gary V, blah, blah, blah. Right. Well, just keep putting it out there. It's going to happen. The universe is listening.
Yeah, the universe is listening for sure. We have so many stories of that kind of stuff happening. Yeah. So now, while we're on the celebrity and the tour thing, this is a weak segue, but I'll try it anyway. What about paying guests? Is that ever something that comes up? I've seen a couple people posting on Facebook recently complaining about this, getting charged as a guest or paying guests. Where do you guys see the monetary, if any monetary exchange between host and guest in this in the podcast world?
The monetary exchange of guest paying host is always a heated debate in the industry. The whole side thing is that I believe, from what I keep reading, is if that happens, you have to disclose that, because then it's like a paid ad, or it comes into something like that where you have to somehow disclose that there was payment exchanged. So, I mean, there is literally, I think it's practically divided. You have a lot of people who are like, no way, unethical, never would I, never should I. But then other people are like, maybe under the right circumstances, I'd pay. It depends.
Yeah.
I'd have to consider it. And I'm sort of there. I'm like, I mean, John Lee Dumas, one of the biggest, right?
Yep.
He charges, I think it's 5-6K.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think it's up there. And I'm curious with a guy like that. So there's a couple things when you break this down, right? Like, okay, let's get over the initial knee-jerk reaction of F these guys, they want to try and charge me to be on their show. But let's break it down from a business perspective. One,
exactly.
John Lee Dumas did not always charge for, I'm not sure when, maybe 2 years ago, something around those lines. But that came in, and one, he has a gigantic platform. So if you go on his show, you are going to reach a lot of people. And if those are, assuming you are going on his show because you have similar audiences, it could be a huge benefit for your business to be on his show. So like, why shouldn't he get paid? But I think on the another reason is, 2 other reasons. One, it helps filter them out, because I'm sure once you reach a certain level, they are getting spammed. I mean, I get annoyed with like 2 spam messages a day. If these guys are getting spammed with dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who want to be a guest, how do you filter through all those? So just from a filtering standpoint, putting a barrier to entry there might make sense, right? And then, on the other side is, what about the quality of guest? Like, if you're going to show up to be a guest on my show, I want you to show up and do a great job. I mean, how much more committed is this person going to be to show up and do a good job than when they're paying a couple grand to do it, right? So I think there are a couple reasons, and I think they're very specific times when it could make sense from that perspective. But I think, the typical average and above average show, I don't see that coming into play where you should be paying. I think there's a quid pro quo around, I'm going to come on, I'm going to deliver a ton of value for you. You're going to have me on as a guest so I can, get in front of some new people. And then, like we said before, usually you get to plug in either something free or paid that you're promoting at the end.
I'm going to throw a wrench in this for you, Todd, just because I know some
of you can't dodge a wrench, you can't dodge a ball. Let's see it.
So let's say I have a $500 price tag for my show. Whatever the reason, right? Yep. I'm not going to justify or so I have a $500. You want to, and you come across, you're like, oh, this looks like a good show. $500. Let's say it was just that. It's like $500. Yeah, you have to pay to get on the show. You pay, you get on the show. We're good. We're in business. Here's your scheduling link. Is there a difference? Because I've also seen this. It's not $500 to get on my show. I'll book you on my show, but we have an advertising package over here for $500 that includes, we're going to promote it. We might run some ads to it. We're going to do a little bonus episode. I'll do a whole bumper in the beginning. We'll promote. Is that different?
I think that's very different. I think because then you're buying beyond just being a guest. Right. There's
but what if this is mandatory and the only way people get on the show? There's no free entrance. It's you have to purchase.
I think, but if you're doing all those additional things for the person, there's a service. That's a service charge for what's involved, because they're not just being a guest on the show. That's my perception of what you just described. Eric, what's your take?
Agreed. I mean, I have some questions. If there's a show that exists like this, or shows, does that mean every single episode with different guests has a different sponsor? Different ad? I mean, that's different. I mean,
logistically it
does.
It's terrible for the business, but
yeah. But I think legitimately, and like Josh said, if there's complete transparency in the pre-roll or throughout the episode that this guest paid, to be a sponsor on the show. There's the, it's an interesting thing, because I think that I'm okay with paying for marketing. Right. Anyone who has a business needs to understand you have to allocate.
As coming from
dollars.
2 marketers here, 3 marketers here. Yes, it's okay to pay for marketing.
How are you? Everyone knows the lifeblood of business is marketing and sales. So how are you going to how are you going to gain any success, any traction, gain anything in your business if you don't market yourself? I look at podcasting as a marketing channel and a platform. So why wouldn't I pay to get on someone's show if they have a large audience and I know that I'm going to benefit from it?
So you're saying in general, not just in Josh's scenario with the whole package.
No, just like, hey, it's $500. Pay me to get on my show.
I want to know who that is.
We're gonna have a
Make an introduction.
So someone if someone hit us up today and said, "Hey guys, I want to be on the On Air Brand show next week for $500, I'll send it to you."
Okay.
Just that's it, straight up. Like, well,
right.
You could go to go to onairbrands.com/pay right now, and you can let's get that set up.
Set that up really quick.
But no, seriously, like, is that that's not what Josh was describing. I think what Josh was describing was like a full-on marketing package.
Correct.
As opposed to the like, I look at the podcasting at some way of like quid pro quo of, I'm coming on your show to be a guest. You need guests for your show. You need value. I'm bringing value. And
Correct.
I know, that's what I come.
I think if you get to a certain level as a podcast where you're John Lee Dumas and you know they're going to gain and they're going to get a lot of benefit from being on your show, then it sort of makes sense. If you're some newbie out the block,
right,
and you're like, you got 12 episodes out, I mean, who's listening to your show? And why would I pay you anything? I'm doing you a favor. I think it depends on the status of the show.
Yeah, I'm asking out of genuine curiosity. Now, what about the flip side? So today's episode is really about getting guests on your show, right? So are there services? This is a real question for you guys that I could pay someone to get guests on my show? Because we've talked previously, booking agencies are typically, I would hire them to get me on other shows. But as a host, are there ways to pay to get guests on your show, and would that be worth it for someone who's trying to get people on? I don't know of any, but that's why I'm asking. Is that something that exists?
I don't know. Nothing comes top of mind, for hosts to pay for a service to get guests on your show. Wouldn't it make sense if there was a business that, had the Jordan Harbingers, the Pat Flynn's, the upper echelon of podcasts, or in any vertical, any category of business where it's like, hey, we have access to the top 100 in sales or in real estate or in podcasting, and it's a fee. Why wouldn't I pay for that?
Yeah,
I think there is a new site. I'll look for it. That does just that, but it's you create your own profile, attach your own price to being a guest. So like Jordan will be on there, and he might have a 500,
almost like a Cameo site.
Cameo,
for podcast.
Yeah.
They should get into this. That'd be perfect,
that would be super interesting. Yeah. So, all right. So we really locked down a lot of things today. If you want to get a guest onto your podcast, we talked about how you can hit up your existing network for them directly or get referrals from your network, doing cold outreach through social media, or doing your own searches and outreach through email. We talked about events like Podmax, which can pair up hosts and guests in one day. Podmax.co. Our next event is April 16th. You could go with booking agencies and see if they have people that might be a fit. One thing we didn't talk about was being visible for your audience. And so setting up a page on your website that says podcast guests wanted, here's these topics that we want to talk about, putting in your social media bios that you're a podcast host of this topic, right? And using your social profile so that just everybody in your world kind of knows what's going on, right? And I think part of that could be also adding to your email signature. Joe and Matt talk about this a lot too on their show. Their Dream 100 list is actually attached to their email signature. And so in the email signature, hey, if here's our Dream 100 if you know of anybody, right? So tapping into your network for that stuff. Those are the different ways that you can get guests onto your show. Having your own platform as a show does make asking for meetings a lot easier when that meeting is actually a podcast or a recording than it is when you're just trying to get your foot in the door. Some criteria that make for a good guest are that they're going to be a good conversation. They're going to add value for your audience by way of sharing their stories, experience, education, inspiration, motivation, entertainment stuff, which we've talked about on previous episodes here. Check that out at onairbrands.com/show. And then knowing what's in it for guests. Why should they be on your show? Is it that you have a large or specific audience that they'd be interested in reaching? Is it that your mission is something that's very aligned with them? Or is it that they're someone who's very interested in creating a lot of different content assets, right? So make sure it's very clear on your website, on your show site, on your social profiles, what type of person you are, what type of content your show has, and what kind of values you have that they align with the people you're doing outreach for. Because they will do a little due diligence, whether it's 10 seconds, 10 minutes, or an hour. They're going to look into your background on why they should be a guest on your show. So make sure you have a presence online for social and website for that stuff for your show, right? So those are all the tips we have about getting guests on your show. This was part 1 of our podcast guesting mini series. Next week, part 2, we will talk about being a guest on other shows. How can you make sure you find great shows that are aligned with you and what your business goals are, whether that's to grow your show, grow your business, all that kind of good stuff. How do you find the right shows, create those relationships? How do you show up and be a great guest on those episodes? We're breaking all that down next week on the On Air Brand Show. So make sure you guys are subscribed. We would love some ratings, reviews, or if you're on Apple, a follow over there.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
If you have friends or colleagues that do want more guests on their show, make sure you share this episode and tell them to tune in next week if they want to be a guest in other places. And make sure you guys are checking out what we got going on at onairbrands.com/show for all the resources and show notes of this stuff that we talked about in the episode. Until then, we will catch you guys on the next episode.
You're now tuned in to the On